Meet CSS, the definitive guide. At 1,126 pages, you can definitely say it's definitive. Imagine how much CSS knowledge it takes to create a book like this. Meet Eric Meyer.
I think this is a point that sometimes gets lost. Everything in CSS is a request.
And Estelle Weyl.
And you can actually do that now with the has. If this element has these features, then its sibling do this with it.
We asked both of them a bunch of CSS questions, and they definitely gave us some CSS answers.
P has plus table has
P colon has plus table.
TR nth child 14 or something like that.
P bracket and then ampersand or no ampersand A nested inside, so that would be 1 and 1.
So get ready, because there is a whole lot of CSS knowledge in this episode.
We are back and bad at CSS today with Estelle and Eric. We have Estelle, a web warrior, internationally published CSS author, CSS explorer, spec spelunker, founder of Confident Coding, organizer of Perf Matters MDN, garden groomer, international superstar, and overall rad web badass. That's true. But for Eric, CSS samurai, which is really cool. I love the alliteration there. It's pretty sweet. Internationally published CSS author as well. CSS Explorer, member of the CSS working group, and great scribe, I might add. Thank you so much for all that scribing you've been doing. You're a speaker. You have an event part organizer, international superstar as well, and another rad CSS web badass. Y'all just made the CSS Definitive Guide 5th edition. I can crack that thing and knock out an intruder with it and just wipe them out. That thing is a rad brick. Thank you for inviting me to edit some of those chapters. I felt so privileged to do that. And the book has been it's a very inspiring book. Y'all should check it out. Anyway, these are our two guests, and they are phenomenally incredible CSS authors, well-known, and we like them, and we're thankful. Hello.
Hi. I'm just doing curls with a book here.
Double purpose.
Dude, you're looking ripped.
That.
It's how I stay in shape. Yeah. Anyway.
It helps the step ladder as well.
Yeah, you should tell them what you're good
Well,
at.
I feel like you should just be sitting on a stack of them, Estelle. Like, you've got them for all these other purposes. You might as well make a chair.
I actually do use them when I need to get the light at the top of the staircase. If you have a ladder and it's uneven, because you're on a staircase, because one is on one step. If you put two together, you've got a step. So if you put four together, you've got two steps. So you have to buy these books in multiples.
So it's a multi-tool.
Yes.
So you can learn with it, you can lift with it, you can level things out. Wow.
Lots of things that start with L.
That's true. Oh my
pretty
gosh.
good. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you so much for coming on. So Eric, I have a question for you. You have written a book so large about CSS, and I could ask you so many things, but the one thing that my brain wants me to ask is, your CSS reset is the definitive CSS reset of the web. And if you were to add anything to it, you would actually be increasing the carbon footprint of of how much it would be downloading, how much is getting stored, and all that. And so have you ever thought about the responsibility that you have? Or if you introduced an Easter egg or anything like that, like if you understand the power that you hold in your hands?
Yeah, I actually have thought about adding Easter eggs over the years. This might still be the case. I haven't looked at my server stats in a really long time, but there at least was a period where a whole lot of sites were hot linking to the reset on MeyerWeb, like the copy that's hosted there for people to copy and use in their own projects, but they weren't. They were just pointing at it. And some of them were like retail sites, like a large I think it was a grocery chain, some kind of retail chain in the UK that will go unnamed, was hot linking to it. And so I thought about, like, some April 1st, maybe I could, add a background image to paragraphs or the body or something. But I never did.
I would have voted for keyframes. You should have just,
Yeah.
Batman did, Star Wars did.
I'm pretty sure this was before animations when I thought about doing this, because it's been up there a while. This was before animation keyframes, or at least before they were widely supported.
Now that everything is supported,
yeah.
I think you should go for it.
I just
there's so much you can do.
Not only that, you should put it in a layer and then write important. so that it overwrites and you can't do anything about it.
That's the first evil use of cascade layers I've ever heard.
The wheels are turning.
Eric and I like to come up with evil plans with CSS, and we don't follow through on any of them. And people are.
I have followed through on evil plans with CSS in the deep past, but maybe not that one. Although I with generated content, I could like insert an important high Z index positioned Dr. Evil saying, "Stop hot linking or pay me $1 million." But I probably won't, because I always seem to default to doing the adult responsible thing. And
Wow.
what can I tell you?
You know, I had it. Oh no, you go, Estelle.
I was going to say it's not evil; it's just an Easter egg. But I did the learn HTML for web.dev, and so my example website is Machine Learning Workshop, which is the standardized school for machines who can't learn good and want to do other stuff good too.
It's a best reference.
We are all showing our age because we know that reference.
Right.
But it's full of movie references. But it does have 2 Easter eggs, and one of them is if you click the light switch, it turns the page off.
Oh, I love it.
So there's this little SVG of a light switch, and if you click it, the whole page turns black, and the little light switch has a little gray border so you can find it and turn it back on.
Nice.
You know, with Easter eggs in CSS, I find that I turn my bugs into Easter eggs. So like I built the Firebase blog, and we had these like little category pills where if you like hover over them, it gives this like little fill-in effect, and it, inverts the text color. And I did a pill for Vite, and I wanted to fill with Vite's sort of like gradient blue purple. But what I realized was I didn't have relative positioning in the inside of the pill, so it would go to whatever the nearest relative thing was, so which was at the background of the whole page, and it kind of looked like this disco lighting across the whole page. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go with that. That's getting shipped. I was like, it didn't mean for that to happen, but so it's like you hover over it and it gives you little Vite disco lights, and I was like, that not the intention, but that's I'm happy.
When the bug becomes a feature, I love it.
Yeah.
There's a troll I want to do with CSS. Like yeah, go ahead.
It just sounds like a website when a bug becomes a feature and people just tell their stories.
Oh, Adam, we have time for another podcast?
I wanted to troll with CSS and make a site so you load it and it's white. There's or dark or whatever, and there's nothing. But if you hit tab on your keyboard, you can see the one item that's in focus, and it trolls a sighted user to experience a page as if you are an unsighted user, that you really can only get access to the things you're focusing on. And I thought this would be so fun to put people like force you into the shoes. And then I was like, I don't know, maybe it wouldn't be effective. Maybe it'd just make people mad.
I'm 99.9% sure. I just saw somebody share something very similar on Mastodon, like within the last 24 hours. Where somebody basically set it up so that an entire website is white on white. The goal, I don't know if it had the focus thing. The goal was to find out if you could navigate a site using a screen reader when you couldn't see any of the text.
Well, I actually did a site where I blurred everything, but it was just for like it was just like a day's worth of the project, and then I unblurred it. But I used the filter effect and blurred everything except for if it had focus. So basically, you couldn't see much. I mean, you could see where you were.
That's a good.
It was like low vision, not because most people. We always think about building for people who are using screen readers who are like, we think they're completely blind, but most people who are using screen readers actually have some vision. So they know where they are to some extent, but they can't read what you have. So the screen reader helps them. I mean, because people with dyslexia might use a screen reader so they can read it, but hearing it at the same time as reading it makes them realize that they're reading the right thing.
Yeah, I use a screen reader to read me articles in the car. I'm like, I can't drive and read this blog post, but I can't have the screen reader read it to me while I drive. I'm like, this is nice to know your tools.
Totally true. What voice do you use?
Just the default one. I try to get used to the defaults because I assume most folks are using the defaults, and I want to associate and learn the tools of most folks. So I do the same thing with like iOS or Android.
Yep.
I don't go install separate stuff. I use whatever's built in.
Yep.
Yeah, and then I've been turning it up slowly over time. I'm still not that fast, but that it makes me feel cool in like a really nerdy way. I'm like, oh, I listen to it at 2x, and then I'm like, but you go watch a YouTube video and they're like, but it up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's nothing in that. They're like, oh no, that was jam packed full of information of paragraphs. Let me tell you, you're like, that's amazing. It's like musicians where they're just like, oh yeah, I can talk to you while I do this like super 8-count crazy little doodly 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 do, and they're over there processing in one speed and listening in another speed. Oh god, it's cool. People are cool.
Yeah.
Not only could I never do that, I can't even tolerate that voice on TikTok.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
This
Like,
person is weird.
I went on vacation.
Yeah. You know the person I'm talking about.
Yes.
It's always the same voice. I'm like, could you put something at a more annoying speed? I don't think so.
I never thought about that, but that's so true. I never thought about it as like the TikTok voice, but now that you say it, I can just hear it in my head.
Yeah.
I'm not on TikTok. I don't even know. I'm like too annoyed by the concept of it. I'm like, it's like commercials. Every video is like a Super Bowl commercial, and I'm like, I'm not interested in.
They use the
Super
same
Bowl
voice on YouTube and Facebook.
Yeah.
It's just TikTok is actually where allegedly the cool kids go. I don't know. I'm not there.
I hear it a lot. We have a 12-year-old and they listen to like voiced memes. So people will take image memes and then they'll have this TikTok voice reading the text of the meme.
Oh,
And
yeah.
It's an aesthetic.
I think
Let's
that
talk
is
about CSS oral box model.
Don't make me go deep, young man, because I can do this. This was a thing.
Eric, what you just described is a great form of birth control. Just tell people that your kids listen to the TikTok voice.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
That is a new type of torture. It's a 2023 torture style.
So unfortunately we had some of this podcast cut out due to technical difficulties, but one of the things that Eric and Estelle were talking about has got my brain thinking of this question I want to ask you too, is that we're talking about document.layers, we're talking about all sorts of IE5, IE6. It was really, it's showing all the wisdom that's in this room. But the question I have for you, since this is the Bad at CSS podcast, is that CSS is, doesn't slow down. It's just going. Obviously, you might have seen your own book, so as time goes on, how do you two, who have been using CSS since it was there, and now that it's doing all these things like grid layout, subgrid, cascade layers, view transitions, what we live in the future, how do you go about adopting all these things? What are the things that you find that are hard about it? And how do you get to that book? That's so much information and so much change of something that but is fundamentally almost like changing underneath your feet. Sorry, I give you a big question there.
Spice, dude. That was good. Yeah, I mean, very relatable though. Good question.
You're mute.
Eric is muted.
While you're thinking about that, Estelle, I'm going to show that I can make good on my threat. This is from the 3rd edition of the book. It says speech rate.
Yes.
Oh my
That was
gosh.
a proposed CSS property once upon a time. Speak numeral, speak header, speech rate, volume, voice family. If you remember, voice family. Used in the parsing hack known as the box model hack. That was voice family. Pitch. It was a property. These are all gone. By the way.
Yeah, they're trying to come back.
Yes,
Leonie Watson is back on the spec efforts for oral box. So everyone listening, the oral box model is not your mouth box model. No. It's your ear. It's the audible oral box model. So it's the ability for you to style the way the page sounds to someone. It's super cool. I think.
I didn't realize that it was not implemented. I just went to MDN to check. So
Yeah.
in terms of nerdery, for work, I use the Edge browser for work. So I use Firefox like for personal and Edge for work, and Chrome for this podcast because it doesn't work on either other browser.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But my search engine for Edge is actually MDN, Mozilla Developer Network. So if I put
Oh,
anything
that's a
into that,
flex.
it always returns MDN results. So if I
Nice.
want to see something exists, I just type it into the URL bar, and then I get the result of the page. So I don't even. Eric knows this book by heart, so he just opens the book to the right page. But I use this MDN search engine.
Oh, please. I search MDN all the time.
But you're not as nerdy as me. You don't have it as your default search engine.
No, I don't have it as my default search engine, but my fingers have the muscle memory of prefixing any search about a web technology with MDN space and then whatever. But anyway,
that doesn't actually work in Edge if you have the default of Bing, because that is like the world's worst search engine.
Interesting.
Nothing personal, Bing, or Microsoft, but you'd never find your result. Anyway, I interrupted you. Go ahead, Eric.
No, you. So David asked us what we find challenging or difficult. I think you should. What do you find challenging with all the new CSS coming in and
learning what's new and what's supported and what's not supported?
Yeah.
Like yesterday, I was looking at generated content, as one does.
Sure.
And there's a contents value. So contents isn't actually supported, so you don't need to learn this or mark it down, but you can actually, because you can replace an element, you can put the contents back in the element with other stuff, because you could actually replace it. Except for when you replace an element, the only thing you can do is use an image. In some browsers, you can do an alt attribute on that image, but you can't actually replace it with an image and string, because the image takes up the whole space. It's a replaced element, so where would that string go? So it's just like understanding, like, that was such an esoteric thing that no one's ever going to need to look up, but I need to know this to a level to be able to teach it. And it took me like a week to grok it, because I'm like,
wow.
What is this doing and why? And so Eric and I, when we wrote the book, I want a subtitle on the front page. We read the specs, so you don't have to. And they wouldn't let us. It says web layout.
Oh, that's good.
But on the back, we got it on the back cover.
Yeah.
So it does say
Nice.
we read the specs, so you don't have to, which is really what Eric and I do. We read specs, so you don't have to. So the spec is like 3 little short paragraphs, and you have to interpret it. So when I was writing it for MDN, so my day job is I work for Open Web Docs, and we're a group of we're an open source collective of 4.5 people, so 4 full-time people and 1 contractor. So that's why we call her a half person, because she's not really full person. I don't know. So we're 4.5 people working on MDN, maintaining documentation all the time. So we're like the largest paid group of people working full-time on MDN content. And so I get to actually look at all of the CSS modules, where it used to be CSS1, and then it was CSS2, and then CSS 2.1. And some people call it CSS3, but that's not a thing.
There's a CSS4 working group, which I'm a part of, which we should maybe talk about. It's spicy.
Because I didn't know there was a CSS4. But there are like over 100 specifications. Well, at least 85 that are actual real specifications, and some you're kind of like, is this ever going to happen?
Right.
So I'm documenting all of those to the minutia level, and you're kind of like, oh my God, this is so cool. And that's why I don't work on I'm not on a specification working group, because these people have the ability to think about things that I never, like every single use case and every single language and every single one person out. So what am I not good at? Finding, those total edge cases originally, but people who are writing these specifications really do. And it's kind of amazing what they come up with. So keeping up with all of that is really hard. But
good answer.
We do it so that the listeners don't have to.
you're synthesizers, and that doesn't mean that you're a Moog. It just means, right? You're taking the massive, complicated chaos and squeezing out orange juice for us and saying, do you want with pulp or without pulp? And we get to choose.
And we're like, this is so easy.
So tell us about the CSS4 working group.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So like the idea of it is the word and phrase CSS3 has been around for like 10 years. It serves a very important purpose. Oh, is it not 10 years? I mean,
way longer.
2023.
Yeah.
It's longer than that. Yeah. And so it's like, it's been over 10 years. People are still using it. Like, we want to hire CSS3. We teach CSS3. And we're like, damn, that is old. You're trying to sound new and you don't. You sound like you don't know what you're talking about, is basically anybody saying, come learn CSS3. And so what our goal is we need to, we're looking at the term and saying, this is a marketing term that's clearly pushing CSS forward. It's a vessel that people attach themselves to for new educational content. So colleges probably would love a concept of CSS4. Online trainings, hiring. If you want to hire, you can say we need CSS4, but somebody has to define what CSS4 means. And it used to be cut and dry because the levels matched the spec numbers, but now we're all out of whack. So this working group is trying to get together and talk about what are the criteria that separates 3 from 4 and 4 from 5 and 5 from 6. How can we include the community in this so it's not just some sort of rained down thing? And yeah, Estelle, I see your hand up.
Okay, so you're like, so the, for career or something, they'll ask for CSS3. I don't know if you've looked at any job listings, but CSS isn't even mentioned. Like, all of these engineering roles I look at, it's kind of like, you need to know, because you're developing a UI, you need to know TypeScript and WASM. And the reason I'm saying those two is because there's a bunch of frameworks listed and I don't use any of them, so I don't remember their names. But CSS is not mentioned. So you might need to know Tailwind, but you don't need to know CSS. You might need to know
React.
Well, React is obviously like Next.js, Next.
Right.
Like, no one asks for Yarn or NPM or any of the things like we're actually using every day. But they're
Git.
These
Yeah.
frameworks that you either use or you don't use.
Yes, I hear that. The job postings are lacking CSS almost entirely. If they do have it, it's like a tiny footnote. They toss it on there like, surely you know this easy one.
Yeah.
You know?
That we complain
surely
about all the
you can
time.
show up and figure it out, right? And most people are like, oh yeah, that's the one that's just like a paintbrush and you walk in the house, you paint a wall. I can paint walls. And you're like, wow, you have not written very much CSS or else you would know that you are talking about the 1% of its capability, but whatever.
My favorite job listings are the ones that say that you must have, experience with React, experience with HTML and CSS as a plus. Those are the best.
Don't think people realize that everything that is output is still CSS, JavaScript, and HTML. No matter what you're using. I mean, yes, there's multimedia, but everything you're actually putting to the page ends up being a DOM node, CSS, or a JavaScript function.
Yep.
Though, I will say this about CSS skills for a job interview, because I feel like a lot of my success in my career is this. From a very young age, I was very interested in CSS because I was like, I was just learning it as a kid. No hot takes, no opinions. To me, this was just like learning anything. Like, it was just like I wasn't in any like dev culture. I just wanted to make websites. And I'm like, oh, that sounds really good. Why did I stop doing that? But I would make this, and I'm like, wow, like out of all the things that I'm doing, CSS is the most impactful because it's moving things, it's changing colors, it is manipulating the way, in a positive way, the way that someone feels about my page. And I was like, this is a tool that I should be very good at. And so I was always very compelled to do it. But I do know when I'd go out of school and I was interviewing at places, they're like, how much C# do you know? How much JavaScript do you know? How much this do you know? And then during interview tests, they'd give me this page and they'd be like, okay, write the C# function that will return the JSON to do this and that. And I would be like, oh, this page is so ugly. And so I just like clean it up because I'm like, I can't concentrate looking at this. And so I'd be like, drop it in fonts, like, oh, okay, let's get this here. Okay, let's space that out here. And then, and then I do the rest of the assignment. And then they come in and they'd be like, well, that looks good. Like, no one's ever done that before. And I was like, oh yeah, just do some CSS on that. And then you could see them whisper and they're like, it would be really good to have someone who knew how to do CSS here. Yeah, we didn't put that on the job, but we could ask him all the questions. And they're like, you're hired. So like I found that was a lot of the times I'd come in for C#, but then I'd get in through CSS. And so that's sort of been my career with CSS, is just like, I've never taken the full CSS avenue, but I've very much used it to impress people.
And that's probably why you have a much more lucrative career than Eric or myself, because CSS does not actually pay.
Yeah, it turns out.
Yeah,
it
that's
does
been a hard one.
In secret. Yeah. You just have to like get in the door for something else. I cannot tell you, literally throughout my whole career, I've been in the door to do something else. And then I've always just sort of raised my hand and been like, this is ugly. Or like that element is not aligned over there. Like I was like, when you have a party, do you clean up, right? I was like, you cater, we get everything laid out. You're like messing with the way that all the plates are set out. I was like, we're very clear about it. I was like, your website is a party that you're inviting everyone to. You can't just have the elements, chilling. They gotta be nice and set up. Like, that was always my philosophy about it. And everyone agrees with that, but it's very few people who actually are like, all right, let's do it. Let's pixel mash here. Let's nudge and do all that. So, but if you want to, if you show, that's my thing. If you show up as a React developer and you can stay as a CSS developer though, because no one else wants to do it. So you just be the person who does it.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah. This is my advice to anyone who really wants to write CSS is just you just know that everyone hates it. And so you just
Eric, do it. You and I both have to learn React so we can get hired to do CSS.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's basically the moral of this story, is we have to learn something that we don't need to use, because we can do everything in CSS. I worked at, I name names, unlike Eric, I name names. I worked at Visa for a while, very short while. And they had multiple megs of JavaScript, and they had Bootstrap, and they had like multiple frameworks in this one page website. It was a single page app, but it was actually just a single page. It was a form. And so I rewrote the whole thing in CSS, HTML, and JavaScript with like maybe 16 lines of JavaScript, just changing classes.
As one should.
Yeah, so it was under 1,000 lines total with all those three technologies combined. The thing worked fine. They didn't use it because I don't think they actually knew how to implement it, or they would have lost, like maybe not had their jobs or something because you don't need a team of 13 people to maintain 1,000 lines of code. You do need a team of 13 people to maintain 4.76 megs of code for a one-page form.
Wow. Yep, you bring up a good point, which is our industry has done very good at making our job harder and scale. And we've created all sorts of roles and problems for ourselves. So we got build systems. Now we have DevOps people. They're not back end. They're not front end. They just manage the builds. And you're like, oh, okay. Design systems have created tons of jobs. They've created more jobs than they've solved problems. And you're like, hey, that's smart work in there. You get your friend tired. But yeah, I've always had to fight for the HTML CSS role. It's never been promoted internally. I've led design and development teams and been like, I have a section of folks that don't want to learn JavaScript. And they were like, my managers were like, well, then we can't, there's no promotion path ladder for them. And I go, bullshit. There absolutely is. And if you get rid of them, if you convert them to JavaScript, you just got rid of the person that made the calendar beautiful. Like, you can't just have someone building a functional calendar. Like, that's like, no one wants your just barely functional car. They don't want your just barely functional anything. I don't want a vacuum that's just barely, I want something that's a combination of elegance and beauty and functionality all in the same thing. You can't, so they're just, we over index on an industry as like innovation. But the reality is that the long tail, the hardest part is the UI, the UX. This is the part that AI won't take out as soon as it can other things. And we're going to find that design, this is my spicy take, is that design and CSS will be the last things to be replaced by AI and robots, because it is the most subjective, most chaotic thing that you have to implement. Therefore, you have to have people. People must be there. You have to test it with people. People have to be considerate and empathetic, gather up all the requirements. Anyway, that's my spicy.
Seconded. Yeah. On the subject of designs, though, I do something I want to bring up. I don't know. I really have a question for it. I just kind of bring it up. Is that
this is more of a comment than a question? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, but it's a comment for you, Eric. Is once upon a time, it was a bit ago. Jen Simmons, who desperately, Jen, if you're listening, come on the podcast. Posted about how she was like scouring the design of your when you had redesigned your site, Eric, and she was like, the font pairing is amazing. She was like, I must have it. What font is that's Georgia? And I remember that deeply. I'm a big font person, and I remember looking at it too, and also being astounded that you have a custom font for like the the headings and everything looks good, but you've blended it in with a system font, and not just a system font, Georgia. Yeah. My question is, how?
What website of Eric's are you looking at and saying, "Oh, that looks so good"?
Is it me, or did it get a lot colder in here all of a sudden?
How's your back? It looks like you might have been.
We're talking about MeyerWeb.com.
Okay, Eric and I compete on who can make uglier example.
Yeah, it's actually. In our training, and I will say here, I yield maybe only to Estelle, but in training stuff, my stuff looks terrible. Like Estelle and I are on the same page. I'm like, if we really want to grab the student's attention, then like lime green on fuchsia is what I'm using for the example element or whatever. Anyway,
so yeah. Let me just interject one sentence. When I do trainings, I actually tell the class to make it as ugly as possible, because that way they learn the technology.
Yeah,
for sure.
Otherwise, you're pixel perfecting. Go ahead, Eric. Sorry about that.
So how did I blend? How did I bring together this harmony of Georgia and this custom font? Pure luck, really. Because yes, I have very slowly, absorbed a few design principles over the 30 years that I've been doing web. It'll be 30 years this December, actually.
Wow.
30 years this December since I marked up my first HTML document. But anyway, I knew I wanted to use Georgia, and I went trolling through Google Fonts till I found a heading font that felt like it fit with that. And so I'm actually using two custom fonts. The one for the masthead, and in a very few other places, is called I Am Fell.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, which I love. It's so good.
It is very nice. So you started with Georgia, though. So this is interesting to me. So you made the design decision, or just some principal decision, that you're like, Georgia, we're going with Georgia.
Yep.
Wow.
Because so here's the thing. I don't know how many of you will be familiar with this typeface, but New Century Schoolbook, or New Century Schoolbook, was all the rage in the 90s, in the late 80s and early 90s, when I was at university, and you wanted something to look better than Times. So New Century Schoolbook, I used it, because I didn't know this at the time. I didn't know how to describe this at the time, but I can say now, the metrics of New Century Schoolbook were different enough from Times that you had to write less in order to fill out your 5 pages for your essay. Right?
Oh yeah.
You cut it down by a couple paragraphs. Anyway, and it also, it looks nice. Georgia reminds me of New Century Schoolbook. They're not exactly the same. I'm sure type nerds are like, oh my God, they're so different. But to me, the one reminds me of the other. And I've always liked it. And I like... Sorry?
It never occurred to me that people wouldn't know what New Century Schoolbook is. It's like it was so ubiquitous.
Yeah.
I know. I
That's
just
so. Oh wow. Okay. Go ahead.
So,
Sorry.
so where this really started was what you were articulating. I started with, I want the body copy of my website to be a system font, like a common system font,
Yeah.
right? So that I could say something like Georgia, comma, Times, comma, serif, right? And I also wanted it, this design, which I did in 2000, I believe, or sorry, 2020, Jesus. 2000 is when I did the previous design. When I did this design in 2020, I wanted to redo my site so that reading it felt more like reading an actual print book.
yeah, it feels that
Right.
way.
Yeah, that's what I was going for. A little bit. I mean, that wasn't. I wasn't like it just needs to look like a book. Like there are
Right.
things about it that you wouldn't do in a book, but that's okay. And I really wanted to use IMFEL for like the name of the site and in a few places, but I wanted Georgia for the body type because I wanted something that users would be loading locally, that they would not have to download a whole custom font and then force the browser to render every single friggin' paragraph in a custom font. They're much better at it than they used to be. I acknowledge this, but you still end up with the flash of unfonted text and stuff like that. And where I started from was I'm going to use a common system font, and I know not every system has Georgia. That's why I have the fallback, but most people have Georgia, and so I figured I'll start with Georgia. And then between that and IMFEL, I was like, I'm going to use a custom font for headings because Georgia doesn't work as well when you blow it up. So I went looking. I ended up with, I think it's called, is it XR or ESCAR? I can never remember which order the Z and the C are in. But that's what I ended up picking just because I was just going through Google Fonts, looking at a bunch of different, at a bunch of different typefaces. And eventually I was between that one. I can't remember what the other one was that I had it down to, two of them. And I think I literally set it up where when I was developing it locally, I used nth child selectors or nth of type selectors so that every other heading used XR.
Oh, and you get to preview
interleaving ones use the other one that I was considering. So as I scrolled through, I was like, which one feels better to me? And
that's a great trick. Oh my gosh, I never thought about that.
I came up with another April Fool's thing you could do with the reset. You could use the Unicode range and as Unicode range descriptor and make all the vowels like serif and all the non-vowels sans serif.
Oh my god, that made my eyes bleed.
No, but actually, I wouldn't do that. I would make all the vowels in a slightly different serif to go with the serif for the consonants, so that because if they're serif and sans serif, you can tell immediately. But if it were serif and different, so like all of the consonants are in times, but all of the vowels are in Times New Roman or whatever. Or in code, use Courier and Courier New.
Or Comic Sans for everything.
Yeah, see, that one's easy though. Maybe,
but a classic.
Wingdings. Let's wingding every header.
I understand. I finally figured out why everyone hates Comic Sans so much. Okay. I had foster kids for a year, and everything they printed at the school was Comic Sans.
Oh,
well, because that's contextually appropriate.
But I think younger developers grew up with Comic Sans, like hating it because I'm like, it's not the best font in the world, but there's nothing actually wrong with it, and it actually is easier for people with dyslexia or other differences to read. But if you grew up from like pre-K through 12th grade staring at walls of this when you were in the principal's office, you probably don't like it.
Yeah, that's probably true.
I love fonts. Fonts invoke emotions. And, Eric, you did a phenomenal job of being like, I want this to feel like print. Like your columns feel like print. The fonts feel like print. It feels like when I feel like I can feel the paper when I read your website. And that's like a really cool sentiment. And Estelle, I never thought about that for evil though, where you're thinking about, or like how we I think you're 100% right. You look at Comic Sans and it just invokes like, it's almost like you're looking at like doctor's office print or something like that, like whatever's on like the eyesight. If you made a website with that, people probably also feel a little uncomfortable. So it's true. I never thought about it in terms of like, oh, you want to make someone feel uncomfortable? Here's some fonts to use.
Yeah, there's a few of them that I've seen around, and using the Unicode range descriptor, you could absolutely.
Or that font from Saw. Like, I never saw Saw.
Ooh, nice.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't have any impact on me whatsoever because
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's kind of a cool font. And my partner's like, oh my God, no. Because she's watched all of them.
Now I know what to use for my blog post headings on Halloween.
There you go.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah. I have a question specifically for you, Estelle. Like I've gone through a lot of your stuff, but I specifically remember one of the things that it was enlightening to me is a while back I went through your front end masters course, and I was like, I know CSS, but it's good to do a refresh. Let me go through this, and then I went through your selector section, and then I was like, oh my God. There were so many you're like, okay, so then you can do the caret, and then you can do this, but that matches this, and then this does this, and this does that, and then you could pull this, and you can do this, and that is, and I was like, never mind. I don't know what I'm doing. But since then, I now see selectors differently. When I look at elements on the page, I now look at it. I'm like, how could I get that? Like in the most esoteric, weird way. Do you ever play? Does your mind now work that way too, where you like see elements on a page, or you want to grab something by something, and it's almost like you're creating your own little SQL query, and you're like, let's really flex the muscles here. Like what are some of the most bizarre or distinctly powerful selectors you've used?
What I do actually, because HTML and CSS, you never know it. You can always learn more. But once it's no longer that much of a challenge to do the basics, you're kind of like, I want to challenge myself. Otherwise, my job would be boring. So I will create the HTML template, and my goal is to never touch the HTML page once I start styling it, so that I can actually come up with really cool selectors. So I will do my HTML. I will not put a single class in, and then I will target every single element based on the attributes or the position.
Zen garden style. Yeah.
So
This is like hardcore mode.
But for my own play, I don't use classes. Like I will not put a class name on anything when I'm coding. And the developers can. They can go in, they can add, like their, I guess that would be, that way I don't interfere with anyone's tailwind, because that is just like class up the wazoo. But they can then destroy the site that I created with their tailwind. But it all worked without a single class when I gave them the prototype.
That's amazing.
And they can't figure out what the hell I just did. But
what is give me like a bizarre selector? Like what's something that you think is underutilized, like very powerful?
Oh, there's so many new powerful ones, but if you talk about the old ones, it's nth last of types. So if you did take the class on front-end masters, I create the American flag. I have a table with like a bunch of rows and columns, and I create the original flag. I create it backwards. So I just start from the last corner and I go backwards up. It's much easier to just go forwards down. Actually, it isn't, because you want to put the blue in last. So you start. So if you put the blue in first, you say like the blue part of the flag ends at some point, right? It's only the top left corner. So you have to actually start at the end. And once you hit like the 9th table cell to the first table cell, paint that blue. So it's the last of types that are never, ever used that actually can come in handy.
Interesting.
But first of types, the ones that start from the beginning, are actually faster because, and people ask me about the performance of CSS selectors. And I'm like, they wouldn't be in the browser if they weren't super fast. So don't spend your time optimizing CSS selectors, because yes, you could, but you're getting microseconds. Just remove your React that you're not using, or the jQuery that's been in your site for 14 years, but you haven't needed, or the Bootstrap. Hire me to remove Bootstrap. Bootstrap is my favorite framework because people pay me to get rid of it. but you don't need to pay me to get rid of it anymore. All you have to do is do @layer and then put your bootstrap in a layer, and then you can overwrite it.
Yeah.
But you're
Oh, yeah.
still sending that bandwidth down the pipes.
Yeah.
Right.
So the coolest stuff has to be the has.
Yeah.
You can actually now
Oh,
write.
yeah.
I wrote something on Mastodon the other day, and I just wrote a selector, and I did like blah 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 is blah 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 where blah 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 blah. And someone said, "Well, why did you use is and where?" And I'm like, "Because I wanted it to sound like a sentence."
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I didn't have to. I mean, the difference is the specificity of it all, the specificity weight. But this was just a pseudo, so it was pseudo code that actually in the end worked. So
Wow.
you can do like if like this table has 14 rows, then go above the table and create like the paragraph above this table, do something. And you
Yeah.
can actually do that now with the has, because the has isn't just is this a parent of this element, but if this element has these features, then its sibling do this with it.
Yeah.
Um,
So that would
so-
be P has plus table has tr nth child 14 or something like that. That would
yeah,
work.
it would be P : has plus table. Like if you have a table that comes immediately after a paragraph, then in this
Right.
paragraph, make the A's green.
Right.
You
Or
can actually
whatever.
do that. So any
Right.
paragraph that has a table that follows it has links that are green. You can do that now with CSS.
Yeah. But
Yes.
only if the table has a certain number of rows, or a certain
Oh.
minimum number of rows, or a certain maximum number of rows, or a certain range number of rows.
Yeah, you can do
One of my favorite things to do with has is something like you have let's say a list, like an unordered or an ordered list. You can give it extra margins to push it further away from the text around it if it has, let's say, fewer than 5 list items. And if it has more than 5 list items, then you get the normal
Quantity
margins.
queries, they're so
Oh.
powerful. Yep.
Yeah.
If someone
Yeah.
actually wants to learn something during this show, let me teach something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nesting. So you can now nest.
I was going to ask you about
natively.
nesting. Yeah.
You can now nest natively in CSS. But because I'm the specificity person, not specificity, but specificity, because there's a little fish, and I have not upgraded the specificities chart since 2014, nesting is similar to is in terms of specificity. So it actually takes, when you have a nested something, it takes the weight of the most specific selector in that. So if you do like an A within a paragraph, so you do P bracket and then ampersand or no ampersand A nested inside, so that would be 1 and 1. But if you did A comma foo, pound sign foo, pound sign foo, pound sign foo, the PA would actually be 301, because it's kind of like an is. So nesting has the same specificity as the is.
As is.
Well, nesting uses is only if it's a selector list. It doesn't wrap everything in is, only if it needs to. So it's like like in the PA, it's not going to wrap A in is or P in is. It's only going to do it if you do PA comma B. So if you're targeting the A and the B, that A and B would get grouped together with is, and yes, they would adopt the highest specificity of the contents. I fought really hard for a where version of it. I was like, well, that's kind of tricky. Why don't you give me a way to nest a selector list, but use where? That way I don't have to worry about that. But then it was like,
has 0.
Yeah.
Everything would have 0. Yeah. And it was like, that doesn't make sense. Is was the unlocker of nesting.
But you could put a where
but it
around
has
the A and the, you could.
You all just gave me an amazing idea for like a VS Code extension. We should, you know how like they have VS Code extensions where like you import JavaScript and it tells you like, oh, the bundle size of this thing, which is super hard to fully get.
No one pays attention to that, apparently. Sorry.
Well, it's very hard to actually fully calculate that too, because like, tree shaking, whatever, like, so it's like a sort of a guesstimate, or like uses some total thing. But what if you had VS Code, maybe this exists, that shows you the specificity points of every selector. So as you see the CSS page, you're like that, oh, that one's strong, that one's weak, that one's that. And that would be a very great teaching mechanism for like this selector created this much specificity. Like you can see the points on there.
Yeah, it's in DevTools, Chrome DevTools. Hover over selector, you'll get the specificity score.
Yeah.
It's new. Brambis hooked it up.
I was like, please don't say this is new. Please don't say, or please don't say this is old. I was like, I'm about to feel real dumb.
What's your least favorite new CSS thing coming out?
Yeah.
Oh, I want this answer.
Well, it's like you got at scope, cascade layers. Some people think they're dumb. Some people think nesting's dumb. There's all sorts of new view transitions. Maybe you think those are dumb. What's something that came out and you're like, we don't need that shit? Anything you said that to yourself when you're like
Tailwind.
I love it as spice.
Wait, but you don't love the Tailwind spice. You're like, don't put that spice on my burger. I don't want your Tailwind on my burger.
I don't want Tailwind on my food. That's for sure.
Do
Anyway.
people even know what Tailwind means? I mean, it's literally in Shakespeare. It is fart. That is what it means.
It is fart.
It is fart.
But you can be in the tailwind in a race, right? You can like catch their drift or whatever. You're in their tailwind. You're able to pass them because they're cutting the air and you're anyway, whatever. There's like a flying version of this, but yeah.
Yes.
You're stretching.
Yeah.
I do prefer the fart joke. I mean, I think that's funnier.
We really are stretching, but that's fine. Has there been anything that came out and I said we don't need that?
All the color spaces. You were like, I was happy with 256. I didn't even need RGB.
256. You kids today with all your colors. When I started out, we had 16 colors and we were grateful.
And we liked it.
And they were so ugly. Those 16 colors were awful.
Yeah, but they were equitably spaced around the color wheels. So anyway. I think I've said this before, and I always apologize to Miriam when I say this. I was not convinced that cascade layers were that important.
And they are. They're fantastic.
I'm a big fan, but I hear you where you come from. Like,
yeah,
I'm like Estelle, where it's in all of my demos now. All of my demos have a very clear spot where I'm like, here's what I want to teach you. The rest is, I call it demo support. Right. Like, this is all just supporting you having this moment here.
It's very cool for that, but how many people ship production demos is really the question that I would ask here. But no, I get it, and I am not as skeptical as I was. But you asked when
sticking Bootstrap in there, is basically that's brilliant. Yeah. You want to get rid of your old CSS, and you don't want to pay you don't want to hire a CSS developer because then you'd have to put CSS on your job description. This is an earlier conversation where people are just jumping in right now. You can just put that in a layer and then everything else overwrites it.
Yeah, no, I know. That was one. Color spaces, I don't understand them really.
No one does. It's fun.
Yeah, that's a thing that I'm kind of bad at. I'll be honest. Is figuring out color spaces, and I've constructed demos where at the end of it I've said I understand less than I did when I started. I've seen how these work. I've figured out how each of them works, and I understand less now.
Because you realize what you don't understand before you didn't realize that you didn't understand it. Yeah,
I guess I don't know.
We thought we knew color with hex, and then you learn the new color spaces, and you're like, holy crap, there's an iceberg of knowledge required to effectively use these new spaces.
The fuchsias and the purples you can use are just amazing if you have the right monitor.
Right.
Oh, for sure. The colors really pop. You can really differentiate your site from someone. This is why Apple was in on it in 2016, is they were like, we need our App Store, which is a web view, to look very beautiful and utilize the Retina screens that we've deployed. We better get on this display P3 color space early, because then you put an Android next to an iPhone and everyone goes, well, clearly I want the iPhone. It is much more juicy and gorgeous. And it was a really good play by them. Yeah. But we can do that on our sites now.
As a corollary to this, many, many years ago, and I'm talking 2005 or something maybe, I had a job interview at a place where they did videos, and it was high definition videos. So when you walk into a store that sells televisions, when you first walk
Betamax?
Costco or Betamax, whatever. I only go to Costco, so I don't know any place else that sells televisions. And that the look of that show, because it's not actual live TV. It was this place that sold these high definition videos to places that sold televisions. So you'd be like, oh my God, that's so amazing. And then you'd bring the TV home and none of the shows actually use such high resolution. So it didn't look as good at home. But now we can create websites on that TV that you bought in 2007 because it had such beautiful colors, and it might support it.
Yeah, I think about it like VHS and Blu-ray all the time. I'm like, every site that's using RGB or hex colors is a VHS now compared to the Blu-ray that you can get if you use Display P3 or OKLCH. You can tap into that extra juice, get that vibrancy. But yeah.
I just wear like plain color t-shirts and jeans every day. So like, I don't know anything about colors, but
I just wear black.
Yeah.
Very easy.
No, color spaces are basically math. And so I'm like, no, okay. I like color when it was color, but now color is math.
It's just there's just so much complexity, and so much of it has to do with human perception. Like, Adam, you and Estelle were just saying, like, these colors you can get on the right monitor are just so much more amazing now. I actually just replaced my monitor because the old one was dying. And I was real careful. I was like, what display P3 coverage does this monitor have? And like, oh, this one looks really good, but its display P3 coverage is only like 90%, and this one's 95%. So, right. So in the end, I got one that's supposed to have really good display P3 color coverage. I made sure it's in display P3 mode, and I've gone to the test sites, and I was like, yeah, I mean, that orange is a little more intense, but just because, but that's human perception, right? Like,
yeah.
Adam and Estelle could be looking at this exact same page and be like, that is such a huge difference, and to them it is, right? So I think that's part of why color spaces are so incredibly challenging, because because I have some sort of color deficiency, just because like there's no sort of like objective way to say, and this will look, X% better to everyone, because it won't, right? It will look X% better to some people because of their monitors, and X% better to some people because like they're red-green colorblind or whatever. And it gets super.
I had a client who was color deficient, and he was very insistent on the colors I used. So it was really weird because I don't think he knew he was color deficient, but the site was purple, green, and brown.
Yeah.
And so I had those colors to work with to actually create a good looking website. And I think I did, but it was really weird having someone who was really insistent when they didn't have half the color spectrum.
Right.
I think color as a request on the web. I'm like, you can just, you don't get, you can't definitively get a color, kind of like a font size. Yeah. Like, I feel like font size is a request. Hey, I would like it to be 1 rem, but like whatever your settings, you should have a say in this too.
But that's the thing. Yeah. All CSS is a request. Everything in CSS is a request.
Right.
I think this is a point that sometimes gets lost. And it's a point that I know Jeremy Keith has been making for years. I've been making for years, that you are requesting that the browser do X, Y, and Z. And if you think about CSS like that, it actually becomes easier to sort of hit that Tao of web design Zen flow state where you say, okay, this is what I'm aiming for, but I'm asking, I'm not demanding. This is not a command. It is a request. And in some respects, I think color, like taking that attitude towards color spaces, if we can get a lot of people to take that same attitude, then we can sort of spread that awareness to everything else. Like you say, with font sizes, even if you say, I want this font to be 17 pixels, it's still a request.
Still a request, can still be changed. I think this is why JavaScript people hate CSS. They are control freaks. This is why they love TypeScript. It makes them feel like they're in more control. And the reality is, that's a massively contentious concept. Like, because in JavaScript, you are telling. You're not asking.
Yep. But if you make a mistake, you're asking. The whole thing is like, nope, not doing
and the whole thing crashes.
Anything at all you asked for.
So Jeremy Keith literally just published a blog post like last night or my time about declarative versus imperative, and we'll tie it into Tailwind because he ties it into Tailwind. He said he he was being very diplomatic, I will say, in that Jeremy Keith way, where he said Tailwind is a very imperative approach to styling, whereas if you're writing native CSS, like that's a very declarative, and declarative is much more of a request, and imperative is much more of a command, right? And JavaScript, same kind of deal. JavaScript is absolutely imperative, and if the browser, chooses not to obey in even one point, then the whole thing falls over, because that's what happens with imperative languages. Like when I used to write Turbo Pascal and you hit F9 to compile, if you had an error, it just wouldn't compile, and it would tell you, nope, sorry, compile error. You get no program today until you fix this compile error, right? A lot of languages are like that. CSS and HTML are not like that. They are declarative. They're flexible. They have fault tolerance.
CSS is typed, right? It's the most forgiving typed language out there.
Yeah. Douglas Crockford said that web development is the most hostile engineering environment known to man. My take on that is that it's the most hostile environment to engineer assumptions known to man. Because when you go in assuming, I do this, this, and this, and I get this, this, and this, it's like, no, if you do this, this, and this, you might get that, that, and that, or you might get some variant of that, because all of this is declarative. All of it is fault tolerant.
I bring something back to that, which is that's why it's always important to have fallbacks. So like if you're declaring something, you're saying like, I'd like the background to be this image. But if that image doesn't work, and you have like, it was a really dark image and you have white text on it, you want to make sure that that white text is still visible if that image doesn't show up. So always like, you always want to foolproof your CSS. And make sure that everything's legible. So like if I ever use white font on a dark background, I'll put like a little dark shadow on it, or on the text, which won't show up if it has a dark image of the background.
Shelly Tennant.
Shelly's on the pod.
Okay.
Hi, Shelly.
What was I going to say? Sorry, I should have turned that off.
White text over black backgrounds.
But even if I had turned it off, the computer, because it goes into the computer, would have still done it, and I wouldn't have thought that. So basically, you put a background color, but if you have a transparent PNG or an SVG and you can't do that, put shadow on your text so that they can see it. But the interesting thing is I have come up some CSS values that are supported but not implemented. So like in Safari, if you do generated content, so like all browsers now do content replacement, so you can put generated content on any element, not just pseudo elements, and it will replace the element. So you can do like content and put an image on a box, and like the text disappears and you have the image. Linear gradients are supported as a value, but Safari doesn't render the gradients as a value for content replacement, so it just makes the whole thing disappear. So there's no way to do an at supports, because yes, it supports that value for content, but only on generated content, not on replaced elements. So
because remember, kids, at supports really means at understands.
Yeah.
Browser understands what
can
you
read
said.
it and doesn't choke. Yeah.
Right.
It's like with color, you have to do two. With color, you got to do two. This at media dynamic range is high. So are you a capable HDR display? And at supports OKLCH or display P3. Can you understand the color that I'm speaking to you? Also, are you even capable of showing it? Or am I wasting my time type of thing? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's all fun.
I like it. I like it. It's like herding sheep. I feel like that's CSS is you've got a page, everything's chaotic, and you're just sort of like nudging and herding sheep into little pens. You got, here's my cows, here's my sheep, here's my, different content types. And I like thinking about it that way. They can grow or shrink, and I don't care. I made a healthy pen that will contain them in many scenarios. And
so what you're saying is that advanced CSS developers are basically border collies.
I'm a herding dog. Yes.
I could get down with that. Yeah.
I'm 100% there. I love border collies. They're the best.
Yeah, they're great dogs.
Nice.
Before we totally get out, I have one question I have. So looking at the size of your book, like here, pull up your book. We saw it in the beginning, but let's see it again. Look at that. Like that is truly definitive. Like you must look at that and be like, well, we called it correctly. Like hey, you're good at naming things. You're obviously in CSS. But what I would say is, or my question to you is that's a lot of stuff. Do you ever have any moments where you just kind of woke up in the middle of the night or realized as you're going through, like, oh man, we forgot floats, or oh, we forgot, like there's like, oh, grid, come on, grid, really? Like, did you have any like moments? Because that's, it's hard to get everything.
So the moments I think that we had the most were, oh God, we don't have X and X is starting to ship. Is it, do we need to get these in before we go to publication? I mean, yes, I'm sure there, like at one point, I think I did a sort of woke up in the middle of the night or suddenly stopped dead in the shower and was like, conic gradients, crap.
Conic repeating gradients. You're like, I forgot the repeat.
Just conic gradients in general. They're in here, by the way, just to be clear. They did make it in, but at one point it was things are going great. Oh, crap. That's
all the time.
Gradient.
After we went to print, we realized we missed a whole chapter.
Yes.
But we didn't have space for it, so that's our excuse. We couldn't get it in, there wasn't room.
We're up against the publisher's page limit with this.
Nice. The spine limit.
You can literally only print 1,200 pages.
Yeah, total, like 1,200 pieces of paper.
Yes, so it's 600 pieces of paper, so front and back.
Okay, right.
And you have the front cover and the back cover, so that's 4 pages right there. And then you have like the blank page at the end and the blank page at the beginning.
Which count.
Yep. So we are at 1126.
That's the official page count, but that doesn't count the stuff like the frontispiece and the
so you made every page count, or every page you could have.
Really tried to. I think for me the oh crap, we didn't do it was mostly about the function values, because there are literally like 100 function values now. They're all listed, but we weren't able to cover I think they're all listed. I think we snuck the math functions in right at the end. So
no, there's more functions. There are more functions. There's the 3 target functions.
God damn it. Anyway,
but they're not supported yet, so it doesn't matter. And then there's the content function, which may or may not come in.
Anchor positioning is not in here, for example. Anchor positioning is super cool, but at even as we record this, let alone when we finish this and send it to the printer, it's only supported behind a flag in one browser.
Right.
And that's like when maybe if we could have 2,400 page books, we would say, let's have a speculative chapter, but like we can't do that anymore.
Yeah, the next book has to be 2 books.
Yeah, we have already told O'Reilly that if there's a 6th edition, it either has to not be a guide anymore, or it's going to have to be 2 volumes.
It's going to be like the Lord of the Rings, the 5-pack. You get in a little box.
Chronicles of Narnia. I told them with the previous edition that we should every chapter should be its own little thing, and there should be a Chronicles of Narnia book.
That actually would be really cool.
That is totally awesome.
Yeah. They didn't go for it. Anyway,
it's a lot of new animals they have to print on the front, though.
We totally should do that, and then have the box. Create a box that can actually grow, so you can put new chapters in, and so we don't have to keep rewriting the chapters.
The other thing that I've actually suggested to them, they're not going to do it because it's would absolutely break their model, is that they do it the way that legal publishers do it, which is let's say you buy the Ohio Revised Code, right, from a law publisher, and they send you a 3-ring binder that has the Ohio Revised Code. And then every year they send you an update that basically says like, replace these pages with these pages, add these pages here.
You have to manually be Git.
Yeah, you manually
do the diff. Yep.
You manually run your diff. But that's how you basically subscribe to a yearly update to the Ohio Revised Code or the Minnesota Revised Code or the whatever. I was like, we should do that. Just like a big 3-inch or 5-inch 3-ring binder, something like that. We'll send them this, and then every year or 2 years or whatever interval makes the most sense, we send them updates. They're subscribed. And they're like, nah, we already have a subscription service online. We'll just update the PDFs. It's fine.
You know, doing the diff that way though, that would be a real way to keep, up to date with like what has changed. You're like, well, according to pages 7, 111, 94, like 692, now there's a new value for this property. Or like,
now, the fun thing to do would be each update would have a different
color
along here.
Oh.
So like this,
and they'd have to print
crazy
color
rainbow of.
That would be very cool. That would be very
awesome.
cool.
But we
Just
did
be like,
with this version, we basically like the previous versions. Floating was really important.
Yeah,
floating's not that important anymore.
No.
It's back to its single-purpose use that it was for. Yay! It's not abused anymore.
Now it doesn't support how we fundamentally do layouts. Yay!
And then the tables, probably that in the original book was probably huge before floats was huge.
Oh yeah.
Actually, no.
Thank you.
Wasn't.
I knew what. That's why I liked you. Okay.
Yeah, it's part of the reason why the first edition could be so tiny. I was just like, here's how you can style tables. I'm not going to talk about laying out with tables. We're moving on. Thank you. There is still a chapter in here about how tables are laid out. Something tells me that in the next edition, that's going to have to get reduced or
I actually think
or possibly spawned into like an online supplementary thing that like is available for free to every.
I think tables are actually really, really important, and we might expand it basically on because like you can use call group to color the back of a column, but anything that you put on the front of that column is going to override it because it's actually sitting on top of the call group. But you can probably use the HASP pseudo class to figure out which table cells you want to color. So you probably want to actually keep all of that. I mean, you can't really teach someone how to do the CSS for a table without teaching them how to do the HTML for a table.
Yeah. See, chapter 13, table layout and CSS. It has this lovely
look at that
act diagram. That's HTML and CSS, by the way. All of these figures are basically.
That's awesome.
But it's got a stack of like what the various like how a table is composited basically.
That's really cool. The compositing is a very overlooked. It's completely overlooked.
And if you look this up online, because all of the figures are available online, if you go to this online, it starts out just looking like a table, and when you hover over it, it 3D animates and expands into this, and then it'll go back.
Okay,
so
that's nice.
We were able to do some fun stuff, but yeah, like I don't even know how many figures are in here, but I think all but like a half dozen are just screenshots out of a browser. There are high-res screenshots out of a browser using Firefox's screenshot command line tool, but that's how I did them in the very few cases where Firefox wouldn't support something. Like when I couldn't get Firefox to show a thing, I would go over to Chrome, like blow it up to 200%, take a screenshot, etc. So yeah, there's a very few that are not, like I say, like a half dozen or so that had to be done using, or that it was easier to do using something else. But the vast majority of them are just HTML and CSS files that are online for free. Anyone can check them out.
We say that we do that because we're really cool and we're really good at CSS and HTML, but it's really because we're terrible at Photoshop.
Oh no, it's neither of those things. Actually, we say we do it because we're really cool and good at CSS, but at least the reason that I started doing it and continue to do it is that if I construct a figure and it doesn't show what I thought it was going to show, it means I probably don't understand what I just wrote about, and I need to go back and figure it out. Like if I can make the figure illustrate what I'm writing about, then I understand it.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I write for Open Web Docs. I do all these examples on MDN, and every single one of them, I open up and do an example on CodePen.
Yeah.
If you see the most boring CodePen account, you can go to codepen.io/Estelle. But if you want to learn about useless trivia, it's all there. There's probably like 1,200 pens already on. Wow. The title is just the property that I'm.
Just little tests. Yeah, those are fun to do. Yeah,
they're fun.
I don't understand people who don't use CodePen. I'm like, how do you? So Eric,
I use the new MDN page, the new MDN feature. I use that one. I don't use CodePen.
I just use BBEdit and transmit to FTP stuff. So
there you go, FTP. Oh, I don't miss that. I'm not gonna lie. I took down a lot of stuff doing that.
What do you think of the new play? Because I try using it and then I just open it up in CodePen and play it in CodePen again.
I pretty much do the same thing. I open it up in there and I'm like, hey, this looks like it would do the thing I want, but I kind of just want to save it and go back to CodePen. So yeah, I go to CodePen. I've got a lot of templates
Chris.
there where it's like, oh yeah, Chris, you're killing it with CodePen. I want to see what the next version of CodePen is. Apparently they're working on it. I'm intrigued. As we wrap up, I made 2 puns during this episode in my mind, and I want to share them with you. They're probably going to suck, but here we go. The first one is wisdom. Someone said wisdom, and I was like, wisdom. We need a framework called Wiz that manipulates the DOM, and you call it wisdom. Or just wisdom. I mean, because then you're not peeing on the DOM. You're not whizzing on the DOM. You got wisdom and not wisdom. Anyway, DOM was in it. And I was like, it's totally an HTML joke. The other one was you're mentioning capturing screenshots and you got to capture them all. It's Polkadom.
Yeah, Polkadom.
Let's make a game called Polkadom. You got to capture all the elements. Visit the web. Got to take a screenshot. Get your Pokedex all filled out with all the HTML5 elements.
Estelle, Polkadom, got to catch them all using complex CSS selectors.
I was just thinking that too. Yeah, you should totally. And each DOM node represents a Pokemon, and then you write the most complex selector to get all of the Pokemon.
But then I would have to learn and actually figure out what Pokemon the actual Pokemon is that everyone was walking around with in 2000.
You just get AI to generate the Pokemon for you, and then you just write the CSS.
Okay.
All right. Well, this was an amazing conversation with 2 of the most wisdom, and I can't do it like Adam can, with 2 of the most incredible, knowledgeable people in CSS telling us about their journey, about all the things that they have learned through the very thick book, and the struggles, the highlights, the everything, and and Eric's amazing responsibility to not destroy websites through his through the hot linking. So it was amazing. And if you all, when is the book released yet, or when does it come out?
It's out.
It's out. All right.
May 31st or June 1st, something like that.
Okay, awesome. So we'll put links to it wherever. Highly recommend it. Like we said, it has all the uses to it. You can read it. You can use it as a steps tool. You can use it as a workout tool. There's no reason not to have it. Let's be real. So
plus it has fish.
And it has fish. It's the fish book, There's also CSS, but there's fish. So thank you all so much for coming on, and we will see you all later.
Visit the Planet CSS.